The Black Cauldron. A movie about it's about the Black Cauldron. If you aren't familiar with The Black Cauldron, this is a movie that Disney made based off of the Chronicles of Prydain, which are a series of books by Lloyd Alexander. They are in turn based off of Welsh mythology. The Black Cauldron is based off of the first two books, and they're books that I don't really hear about very much, even though they were kind of a formative experience during my childhood. I think a lot of the things that I love are probably related to reading these books at a young age, getting that like fantasy at a young age, I guess. And it's really sad that a second movie didn't get made because we only got parts of the books, right? We only got parts of the Chronicles of Prydain. And the third movie has a giant cat in it, which is apparently part of Welsh mythology, something that I didn't know. Like, there are sections of this series of books, especially the section with the giant cat in it, that are just, they live vividly in my mind, and they have lived vividly in my mind for probably my whole life. And if you haven't seen Black Cauldron, it really is kind of a story of just failing upwards, even if that isn't necessarily the story of the book, right? Like, Taran fails to save Henwen, and then he fails to stop the Horned King from getting the Black Cauldron. He even fails to destroy the Black Cauldron at the end. It's actually Gurgi that destroys the Black Cauldron. Rip Gurgi. And so to me, it really feels like a Dungeons and Dragons campaign in that way. Like, you're just constantly failing upward and barely making it by probably your dungeon master's grace, right? Which means that there's a lot that we'll be able to talk about in this movie, despite its brevity. But for those who haven't seen the movie, let's go over characters real quick. We have Taran, Henwen, Gurgi, Elonwy, Fluterflan, the Horned King, and everybody's second favorite little guy, Creeper. So to start, this movie begins with a narrator telling us exactly what we need to know to get into the story. He tells us that the Black Cauldron is a device that was created to trap the soul of someone like very evil, essentially. There's a little bit more to it, but that's essentially what it is. And so his evil soul is in that cauldron, and the Black Cauldron is a powerful magical item because of that. It is essentially the story of the Black Cauldron that everyone in the region, the realm, the local vicinity already knows. It's the common knowledge. And this is something that I see in a lot of fantasy movies, especially a lot of older fantasy movies. I mean, it's even something that's in Star Wars, right? And they just immediately fill the audience in on the oftentimes kind of bed stories of the world. Like, again, the common knowledge of the world. And it's not always a narrator. Sometimes it's a crazy guy in an inn or something, or it is someone telling the actual story to a kid. Game of Thrones clip here. But man, when I get a little lore dump at the beginning of a movie, I love a good lore dump at the beginning of the movie. It just adds a lot to the story. It builds anticipation, and it is something that I never really thought to do in D&D. Like, we have the lore that we build for our world, and we plan on like giving it out through quests and things, and maybe we have something for the players to read, but having like a crazy guy in an inn being like, oh, the Black Cauldron, the Horned King is coming, and everybody's like, yeah, that's crazy Dave, you know, or having that mentor figure that is telling the players, yeah, the Black Cauldron exists and the Horned King wants it. Having people worried about something in the world makes our players worry about it, and again, builds anticipation, and it's something that I feel like I need to use now. And the narration at the beginning isn't the only example of the movie just letting the audience in on what's going on, because everybody in the land knows who the Horned King is, right? The movie lets you know who the Horned King is, and D&D is so often like stopping a bad guy from awakening or uncovering who a bad guy is, and the Black Cauldron is just like, yeah, this guy is bad and he's gonna do bad stuff. We know what he wants. He wants the Black Cauldron. He is a constant looming threat that has been imposing on the realm for a long time now. And once again, it builds that anticipation. The players are thinking, and the audience is thinking, watching the movie, like, well, when are we going to face this guy? Are we powerful enough to face this guy? And that was something that I liked a lot. Another thing that I think is often avoided in Dungeons and Dragons, but something that could work really well. And actually, in my experience, has worked really well. These things seem pretty common in the fantasy storytelling equation. Like, Lord of the Rings does these things, starts with a little narration, then jumps into telling you exactly who the bad guy is, exactly what magic item that he wants. Wheel of Time sort of does this. I don't think it tells you, or no, it tells you who the bad guy is, but there's like sub bad guys that you don't know about, which I think is a good way to do things. It is that existing lore finally coming to fruition, this evil force making its move on the world, and Taran has even like romanticized it to an extent. Like, he's even romanticized death to an extent. And I almost think that's part of this fantasy equation, is this romantic visualization of past conquests, kind of. Like, part of the reason Frodo wants to take the ring to Mordor is because he's heard Bilbo's stories. And I think just giving the players that information is a totally valid way to do things, and something that just works. And also, speaking of this typical fantasy equation, the Black Cauldron, watching this movie, I noticed, like, oh, just having freaky little sidekicks is part of the fantasy equation. Like, Lord of the Rings has Smeagols. Smeagols, plural? No, singles, Smeagols, single. Oh my god. Say Smeagol's single 3 times fast. New from Wendy's, Smeagol's single. But Lord of the Rings has Smeagol, Dark Crystal has Fizzgig, and actually thinking about it, this is something that especially appears in kids' movies, this like weird little sidekick. Like, it's definitely in Ghibli movies, it's definitely in Pixar movies. It's something that, like, you think about the typical hero's journey, not that all stories fit in that, but I think that's the journey we go on in fantasy a lot, and it's like, yeah, we should probably add a freaky little guy in there. And I was thinking about why this happens, and I think partially it's because it is this retelling of old mythology. There's a lot of freaky little guys in old mythology, and it's partially comedic relief. But I also feel like having a weird little sidekick can tell you a lot about who a character is. Like, the way that people treat these innocent, mostly innocent, like, I know Gollum's not innocent, but he also is kind of a victim of the ring. But the way people treat these more innocent characters really tells us almost exactly who they are. The same way, like, someone, the same way you can tell who someone is by how they treat animals. Like, if you wanted some of your players in your D&D game to be immediately suspicious of someone, show the players how that person interacts with small innocent creatures. They will immediately be suspicious of people who are rude or malicious towards small innocent creatures, right? Like, there's a pretty distinct juxtaposition between the way that Taran treats Gurgi and the way that the Horned King treats Creeper. It really seems like everyone in this movie has a sidekick that speaks to who they are as a person. Like, Taran has Henwin, and then later he has Gurgi, and Elonwy has, I don't know if it has a name, but it's like her, like, fairy light orb that kind of has a personality of its own that is part of her personality, you know? Even Fluter Flam, he has his harp that breaks when he tells lies, which is kind of a sidekick. I know that's more of like a cursed magical item, which it's a fun cursed magical item, by the way. I think these magical items these cursed magical items that just kind of mess with the players without totally ruining their time are fun. And the Horned King has Creeper, and the witches have legions of frogs, which maybe that's not a sidekick, but it speaks to a part of who they are. Creeper speaks to a part of who the Horned King is. And I know these are essentially just support characters, right? Like, support characters aren't anything new, but making them little sidekicks that like follow the main character around and are like little jesters in the background speaking to who that character is was something that was a lot of fun, and something that I think that players often want. Like, they want to have little sidekicks. And so we should give them those little sidekicks. Give them control of the sidekick. Give them a talking rat. It adds so much definition to who a character is. But let's talk about something else that I really liked in this movie. Something that is probably going to change how I approach the dungeons that I make in my game. And that something is the Horned King's lair itself. Because it is so vast that the villains of the location haven't even explored the whole thing. It's so vast that they are unable to patrol the whole thing, which does 2 things for our players, right? It makes them able to sneak around and do stealthy things and view the villains while they are unsuspecting, right? Get a little like understanding of what the villains want, who the villains are. A pretty critical point in the movie is when Taran sees the Horned King use Henwin to look for the Black Cauldron, right? This tells us exactly what the villain wants, and he does it from the rafters of the dining hall. And then we get another critical point during the movie after Terran has escaped capture with Elanwi. They're still in the castle. They're going through the ruins, through the parts of the castle that the villain hasn't habitated yet. And they are finding magical items. This is when Terran finds his magical sword, which plays an important part throughout the whole movie. It plays an important part during the escape, during the trade with the witches, right? And this showed me that the villain of this location hadn't explored this whole location. It's so vast that it couldn't be explored. And so you have this interaction between the castle itself and the villains and the heroes. And you get these like little low points between the action that I think would be pretty welcome in D&D. Something about dungeons is that they often feel kind of like loot rooms. Like you're just going through a room, you're seeing what the surprise is. But if you have these little low points, because the location is so vast that you experience low points, it builds anticipation of what is going to happen next. And in a dungeon like this one, where if you started fighting with the guards, they would just yell to the next room and get more guards, right? You can have these kind of pockets of encounters without alerting the whole castle. So that was something that I liked a lot, something that works narratively for building anticipation really well, and something that works gameplay-wise for allowing encounters not to get out of hand really well. This movie really put this idea of this more vast dungeon into perspective for me, because I mentioned that I liked the idea of larger dungeons in the Mummy video, right there. But this movie, because they are kind of sneaking around in the lair while the villain doesn't know they're there, or at least thinks that he has them detained, is something that really adds a lot to this idea of a vast dungeon, something that I liked. And then something else that I liked in this movie that I think is difficult for me to do in Dungeons and Dragons is how much like sacrifice there was in this movie. Terran sacrifices his sword, Gurgi sacrifices himself, right? Willingly jumps into the cauldron to end the Horned King's descent upon the world. And I feel like a good story needs a little bit of sacrifice, which oftentimes is hard to do in Dungeons and Dragons because our main characters don't want to sacrifice anything. Hi, Prismo. Huh? Good nap? Good nap during the video? Good nap during the video? And we also have to question what sort of things our players could sacrifice, because they could sacrifice themselves, but then they'll be rolling a new character. And they could sacrifice magic items, but that's so hard to give away a magic item. And I think that moment of having Gurgi jump into the Black Cauldron itself is sad, but that is the sacrifice of the movie. I think having an NPC give their lives for the main characters, for, in our case, the players, is kind of one of the best options for adding a little bit of sacrifice to a movie, or to a game, I should say. And we once again get this juxtaposition between the Horned King and the characters, because the characters are willing to sacrifice their own. Well, I mean, Terran is even willing to sacrifice himself. He's going to jump into the cauldron and Gurgi stops him. And at the beginning of the movie, he's romanticizing his own death. And Gurgi is willing to sacrifice himself. And Terran is willing to sacrifice his sword. It's these personal things for our main characters. And then for the Horned King, it's everyone else's problem, right? There is a scene from the movie that actually got removed because it was too scary to the audiences, to the test audiences. So only some kids were scarred in the making of this movie. But it's a scene where the skeletons start rising and all of the bandits don't know what to do. And then they start like skin melting and being hacked apart by the skeletons to turn into more skeletons. And it's like the Horned King is willing to sacrifice everybody that has helped him get to where he is. Whereas our main characters, our heroic characters, are willing to sacrifice their own personal futures, themselves. This movie did parallels really well, and that's something we could do in Dungeons and Dragons. If we just look at who our characters are, who our main players are, what kind of heroic actions they're taking, and then have the villain do the opposite, that sends a pretty clear message of what the villain's intentions are, even if the players don't know the villain is the villain yet. for all those plot twist DMs out there. So those are the things that I think we can learn from the Black Cauldron. Hopefully you learned something. If you did, like and subscribe. As always, my name is Wes. This is my dog Prismo, and this is Tabletop Writer, where I look at the traditional and non-traditional methods of writing through the lens of tabletop gaming. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully I will see you next time. I'm Primo. You like this? Huh? Hard to tell. What does that face say? That face says no more. That face said no more belly scratches. Toe Chomper, chomp on his toes. Toe Chomper, he's in the throes of itching his toes. He's a toe chomper.